The first thing he heard was rain, not the static hiss of city storms that fell against concrete and glass. This was heavier, older. Each drop struck mud and grass, thick enough to smell the earth breathe again. Sergeant Elias Ward opened his eyes to a sky that didn't belong to any world he knew. No contrails, no sound of aircraft, no hum of power lines, only wind. He pushed himself upright, wincing. His body ached under the weight of damp fatigues, combat vest caked with dirt. His rifle was gone. Only his sidearm remained, half buried beside him. A soft green hill stretched in every direction, broken only by a distant line of trees and smoke rising from what looked like a village. He checked his comms. Static. GPS, no signal. His pulse quickened. Ward to command, he whispered. Do you copy? Nothing. The last thing he remembered was the convoy. A sand-blown road, an explosion that swallowed the horizon, white light, silence. Then rain. He stood, boots sinking into wet soil. The air smelled clean, too clean. Somewhere nearby, a horse whinnied. The sound twisted something in his chest, a noise out of time. He started walking toward the smoke. The path wound through, fields dotted with wildflowers, the kind he hadn't seen since childhood. Birds circled above, black against silver clouds. He moved on instinct, scanning ridgelines, counting exits, muscle memory fighting confusion. When he reached the village, he froze. Wooden houses leaned under thatched roofs. People in linen tunics hurried between stalls. A blacksmith hammered iron on an open forge. Children stared at him, at his uniform, the faded flag patch on his sleeve, the strange gear on his chest. A woman dropped her basket. "Are you a knight?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Someone shouted for the guards. A group of men appeared. Chainmail, leather armor, spears. The tallest one stepped forward, suspicion written in every movement. "What kingdom do you serve?" the man demanded. Elias blinked. "United States Army," he said automatically. Blank stares. The guard frowned. "Never heard of it. You're far from any banner I know, stranger." He looked around. No cars, no lights, no hint of modernity anywhere. Just smoke, mud, and the weight of centuries. "I think I'm lost," Elias said quietly. The guard's expression softened, just a fraction. "Then you'll need shelter, before nightfall. Come. Our roads aren't kind to the lost." Elias followed, heart pounding with disbelief and exhaustion. That night, beneath the low beams of a tavern filled with firelight and murmured songs, he listened to talk of kings and wars and monsters in the northern woods. Each word chipped away at denial until only one truth remained. Wherever he was, it wasn't Earth. He sat alone by the hearth, watching embers drift upward like red stars. His dog tags glinted in the light, the only piece of home left. For the first time since the blast, he let himself breathe. Maybe this was hell, or maybe, by some cruel mercy, he'd been given a second chance. Outside, the rain returned, soft and endless. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the world washed. In silver light, Elias woke to the smell of bread and wood smoke. The tavern's window shutters were open, letting in the sound of voices from the street below. Merchants setting up stalls, horses clopping over cobblestones, the rhythm of life that felt almost too human for the strangeness around him. His body ached, but he was alive. He checked his vest again. Half his mags were gone, but the pistol still had weight. He turned it over in his hand and sighed. What good was a firearm in a place that believed in swords and saints? He stepped outside. The village was small, maybe a few hundred people. The streets twisted like roots between timber houses, every window brimming with flower pots. Children followed him at a distance, giggling whenever he looked back. He was an oddity here, a soldier out of time. The blacksmith's hammering echoed from down the lane. Elias followed it. The smith was a broad man with arms like rope and eyes pale from the forge's glare. He stopped mid-swing when he saw Elias. "That's some armor you've got," the smith said, nodding at his vest. "Doesn't shine like steel, but I'd wager it's tough." Elias smiled faintly. "You could say that," the man grinned. "Name's Torin. You eat yet?" He hadn't. By noon, he was sitting on a bench behind the forge, eating coarse bread and broth, while Torin talked about the world, the fractured kingdoms, the endless feuds, the rumors of black fire falling from the sky in the far north. Elias listened, quietly assembling the map in his head. There was no hint of technology, no legends of any machines beyond old myths of sky metals and lightning weapons. And yet, the way Torin spoke of those myths, reverent and uncertain, stirred something in Elias. Maybe humanity here had once known more. Maybe it had fallen and forgotten itself. That evening, a crowd gathered near the village square. The sound of shouting broke through the hum of the marketplace. A man knelt in the dirt, his arm twisted by two soldiers, in leather armor. "He stole from the Lord's tithe wagon!" someone yelled. "He's starving!" cried another voice, a woman's. "His children haven't eaten in days!" The captain of the guards raised his hand for silence. "The law is the law." Elias stepped forward before he could think. "He doesn't need punishment," he said. "He needs help." Every head turned. The captain sneered. "And who are you, stranger?" Elias looked down at the man in chains, then back at the guard. "Someone who's seen what happens when you stop caring about the people you're supposed to protect." The crowd murmured. The captain scowled. "You speak as though you've led men." Elias's voice was calm. "I have." The captain drew his sword, resting its tip against the ground. "Then show us, Outlander. Prove your worth in steel, not words." The villagers gasped, but Elias didn't flinch. He unholstered his pistol slowly, holding it low. "You really don't want that." The man laughed. "Is that a toy?" Elias sighed. "Kind of." He pointed at a distant log on the edge of the square and fired once. The crack split the air, echoing across the valley. The log shattered clean through. Silence followed. Smoke curled from the barrel. Elias holstered the weapon. "Let the man go." The captain hesitated, fear mixing with awe. Then he waved his hand sharply. "Release him," the villagers whispered, calling him Steel Mage, Thunder Knight, Soldier of Smoke. Elias just turned and walked away. Later, the woman he'd defended found him by the well, clutching a small loaf of bread. "Thank you," she said softly. "My name is Arin." He nodded. "Elias, you're not from here," she said. "No." "Then maybe the gods sent you," he smiled faintly. "Maybe." For the first time since he'd arrived, the night didn't feel endless. Winter crept early that year. The mornings came dressed in frost, and the breath of horses hung like ghosts in the streets. Elias had been in the village for 3 months. In that time, he had helped rebuild a bridge after a flood, taught a handful of farmers how to fortify their fences, and, more quietly, shown Torin how to craft something close to a hinge-lock mechanism for a gate. It wasn't much, but it was progress. The villagers had grown used to him. Children ran to him for stories, and the elders sought him for advice. Arin often came by the forge with baskets of bread, pretending she had extra when everyone knew. She had baked it for him. She spoke little of herself, but Elias could read in her eyes the kind of loss he recognized. Someone who'd already buried too many dreams. Sometimes, at night, he would take long walks to the outskirts, staring at the stars. The constellations were wrong, twisted, rearranged. Each time he looked, he wondered if somewhere out there his world still existed, or if he had died and this was what waited beyond the smoke of war. Then came the messenger. A young rider arrived one morning, bleeding from the shoulder, his horse lathered with sweat. "The northern barony burns," he gasped. "Creatures, black-armored men from the old ruins, marching through villages, no mercy." The townsfolk panicked. The captain, still wary of Elias, called an emergency gathering. We have no standing army, he told them. If they reach us, we'll fall before sunrise. Elias leaned against the well, arms crossed. Then don't wait for them. The captain glared. You'd have us charge death. I'd have you prepare, Elias said evenly. You have men, tools, walls. Let me show you what defense really means. There was hesitation, then quiet murmurs. Finally, Torrens stepped forward. I trust him. He's seen war. We haven't. By sundown, the village had turned into a fortress of will. He trained them in shifts. How to dig trenches, how to form lines, how to hold instead of scatter. They learned fast. Fear makes good students. At night, Aaron would bring him food by the fires. You've done more for us in days than our Lord has in years, she said once. Elias smiled faintly. I've done this before. It never gets easier. She studied him for a moment, her eyes soft. Then why keep doing it? He stared into the flames. Because someone has to. The next week, the enemy came. They arrived like a storm, armor dark as soot, faces hidden behind helms shaped like beasts. No flags, no mercy. Elias met them beyond the ridge, flanked by villagers gripping spears and pitchforks. His sidearm hung at his belt, but he'd saved the last of his ammunition. One bullet for himself, if it came to that. When the first wave charged, the air filled with screams and thunder, he moved like the soldier he once was, calm, precise, every motion drilled into muscle memory. He shouted orders that no one fully understood but followed anyway. They fought not like farmers, but like survivors. By nightfall, the ridge was theirs. Smoke rose where the invaders had fled. Elias stood among the fallen, blood freezing on his sleeves. His heart pounded not from fear, but from something deeper, an ache he hadn't felt since his old unit, the ache of purpose. Aaron found him after the battle, her hands shaking as she pressed a cloth to a cut on his temple. You saved us, she whispered. He looked at her, exhaustion and relief mixing behind his eyes. No, he said quietly. We saved each other. She smiled through tears. Then stay. Help us rebuild. He wanted to. He really did. But somewhere in the smoke, he saw movement. A shadow watching from the tree line, metal glinting in the moonlight. The war wasn't over, and he wasn't done running from ghosts. That night, while the village slept, Elias cleaned his weapon, packed what little gear remained, and left before dawn. Sometimes, survival means leaving before the people you love start believing you can't die. The frost cracked under his boots as he headed north, toward the ruins and the unknown. The northern wind carried a different silence. It wasn't the quiet of peace or sleep, but something hollow, the pause after a scream. Elias travelled for days through dead villages, burned roofs, empty wells, charred bones half buried in snow. Whatever these black-armoured men were, they left nothing behind except ashes and echoes. By the 5th day, he stopped counting the corpses. He'd grown leaner, harder. The ache in his leg from the blast back home had returned, flaring with every climb through frozen hills. Yet he pressed on, driven not by duty anymore, but by something heavier, the faces of the people he'd left behind. Aaron's quiet smile, Torrens' steady faith, the children's laughter. He couldn't let what happened there reach them. At dusk, he found the ruins. They rose like broken teeth from the snow, ancient stone towers draped in black iron, half swallowed by frost. Fires glimmered deep within, too organized to be wild. Elias crept closer, hugging the shadows. His instincts guided him. Silent steps, breath measured, eyes scanning for movement. He saw them soon enough. Humanoid, armored, but wrong. Their movements were too smooth, too synchronized. Up close, he saw the truth. Beneath the helmets, there were no faces, Only carved bone, hollow sockets filled with embers, necromancy, or something worse. He crouched behind a fallen pillar, mind racing. "They're not soldiers," he whispered. "They're weapons." A sound behind him. Soft, deliberate. He turned, pistol raised. A figure stood there, wrapped, in furs and silver thread. A woman, face pale under moonlight, eyes sharp and strange. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. Elias didn't lower his weapon. Neither should they. She glanced at the undead army below. They are remnants, puppets of a forgotten war. And who's pulling the strings? She looked at him, something like recognition in her eyes. "You're not of this age. I can feel it." He hesitated. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you." She smiled faintly. "Try me." They watched the ruins together for a long time. Then she said, "They follow the relic buried beneath this fortress, a shard of the old world, metal that fell from the sky." Elias frowned. "Technology?" "Magic," she corrected, then softer. "Or both." He thought of his rifle, his gear, the way the villagers had stared at him. Maybe magic and technology were just two sides of the same forgotten coin. "What's your name?" he asked. "Ceres," she said. "Last of the wardens." He almost laughed at the irony. "Elias Ward. Guess we're both the last of something." That night, they crept through the ruins together, ghosts in the snow. Ceres moved with the precision of a hunter, her silver blade whispering through the dark. Elias's pistol barked once, twice, clearing a path. The undead fell like statues cracking apart. At the heart of the fortress, they found it. A crater filled with molten glass and a single piece of black metal half buried in ice. It pulsed faintly, alive. Ceres knelt beside it. "The shard of Etherian. They say it remembers the wars of the gods." Elias stared at it. "Or it remembers ours." When he touched it, the world vanished. He saw flashes, tanks in desert, storms, helicopters rising through smoke, cities burning under skies filled with ash. His world, his war, and beneath it all, a whisper. "You were not the first to fight, only the latest to forget." He tore his hand away, gasping. "It's connected," he said. "To me, to Earth." Ceres nodded slowly. "Then it seems your coming here was no accident." The shard pulsed again, faster now, its glow spreading through the ground. "They'll feel it waking," she said. "We have to destroy it." He shook his head. "We destroy it. This place goes with it. Then we die with it." Elias looked at her, really looked at her. The calm defiance, the acceptance in her voice. She reminded him of the medics he'd known, the ones who never flinched even when the world ended. He smiled faintly. "You sound like someone I used to follow." "And you sound like someone who stopped leading." Her words hit deeper than the cold. The ruins trembled. The undead turned, eyes burning brighter. Elias raised his pistol, chambered his last round. "Guess it's time to start again." He fired into the shard. The explosion wasn't sound, it was light. It tore upward into the sky, a pillar of gold and fire that split the clouds. The shockwaves swept across the snowfields, erasing the army in an instant. When the light faded, the fortress was gone. Only silence remained. Elias woke hours later in the crater, the snow melting around him. Ceres lay beside him, alive but unconscious. The shard was gone, only a faint scar in the ice where it had been. He looked at the rising sun. For the first time since he arrived in this world, it didn't feel foreign. He stayed with Ceres until she woke. Together, they made their way south, toward the valley he'd once called home. The villagers were waiting, Aaron among them, eyes wide with disbelief when she saw him alive. He didn't stay forever. He built walls, trained guards, and left stories behind instead of weapons. And sometimes, when the nights grew quiet and the stars burned like 1,000 watchful eyes, he would sit by the well with Ceres beside him, her hand resting against his, both of them knowing that whatever world he had come from, This one had given him something his never could. Peace. They called him the Iron Ghost, the man who came from nowhere, who fought monsters and taught them how to hope again. But, in the quiet of his heart, he had another name for himself: Elias Ward, soldier, survivor, home. Years passed like pages turning in a book Elias never finished. The wars quieted, the villages became towns, and the roads he had once walked turned into trade routes bearing his name. The Iron Road, they called it. Paved not with stone, but with the stories of those who had learned from him. Children grew up hearing of the soldier who taught farmers to fight and kings to listen. Some said he was half spirit, that his weapons spat thunder, and his eyes held memories of a dying sun. Others swore they had seen him once, grey-haired and smiling, sitting by a forge beside a woman with silver hair and kind eyes. Arryn became the village's mayor, wise and quiet, her hair turning white before her years. Cerys stayed at Elias's side for a long time. Together they rebuilt the north, laying to rest the remnants of the dead and the relics that had nearly unmade the world. Elias never returned to the life he'd come from. He stopped wondering if there was a way back when he realized he no longer wanted one. He'd seen too much of both worlds, one burning itself out with machines, the other struggling to remember compassion. Here, he'd found balance. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, he sat outside his cabin overlooking the valley. The fields shimmered gold. Children practiced with wooden swords in the distance, laughing, their movements clumsy, but brave. Cerys stepped beside him, her cloak brushing against his arm. "They'll make good soldiers someday." He smiled faintly. "Hopefully, they'll never need to be." She looked at him then, really looked, and said softly, "You changed this world, Elias Ward." He shook his head. "No, I just reminded it what it could be." The years caught up to him slowly. His hands grew stiff, his scars deeper. But there was peace in that kind of fading, the kind that comes when the fight is finally done. When his time came, he asked for no monument. He was buried beneath the great oak by the well he'd once built, the same spot where he and Cerys had first watched the dawn break after the war. Centuries later, travellers still spoke of him. Bards sang of the Iron Ghost, the soldier who fell from the stars and taught humanity how to stand again. Scholars found fragments of strange metal buried near his grave, technology no one could explain, and in the valley, when the wind passed through the grass at dusk, it sometimes carried a whisper, not of command or war, just a voice saying, "Hold the line, protect each other, live." The legend said those words could make cowards brave and weary men stand tall. But those who listened closely knew the truth. It wasn't a spell. It was a memory of a man who had once lost everything, found a world worth saving, and chose to stay. Because sometimes the greatest heroes aren't the ones who return home. They're the ones who build one.